I never imagined my sister would slap me across the face in front of 500 wedding guests. But that's precisely what Cassidy did, right after I told the crowd she was lying about something big. And when I say big, I mean giving away the home I bought with my own damn money. Let me back up. I'm Harper Lane. I'm 32, single, and live alone in a penthouse. I earned it the hard way. After serving 8 years in the Army, I came back, got my real estate license, and spent 5 years busting my ass to build a career. No help from my family, no shortcuts. Just long hours, terrible clients skipping vacations, and living like a broke college kid while closing 6-figure deals for others. Now, I'm one of the top brokers at Redwood Property Group in Salt Lake City. And I finally have the place I always dreamed of. The top floor, 2 bedrooms, skyline view, and peace. My younger sister, Cassidy, couldn't be more different. She's 29, beautiful, charming, always in crisis mode. She floated through community college, had a new job every 6 months, and lived at home with my parents until about a year ago. She met Bryce Halden at some charity gala she got into for free, and suddenly they were engaged. Bryce works in finance, whatever that means, and comes from a family that wears boat shoes and calls everyone buddy. The wedding was held at the Willoughby Hotel in Portland. Top floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, white roses everywhere, and a 5-tier cake that cost more than my car. Cassidy was the star of the show, of course. White lace gown, designer shoes, and a full glam squad followed her like a celebrity bride. Bryce stood next to her with that smug finance guy grin. You know the type. Custom suit, slicked hair, handshake like a sales pitch. Everyone was laughing, drinking, clinking glasses. I was at the head table, trying to blend into the background in a $300 bridesmaid dress I didn't even like. Then Cassidy stood up to give her speech. Bryce and I are so grateful for our family and friends, she said, smiling like this was the happiest day of her life. We're starting this new chapter together, and we're excited to move into a beautiful home right after our honeymoon. Cue polite applause. And we're especially thankful to my amazing sister Harper, who's generously letting us stay in her penthouse while we look for our forever home. The room bursts into claps and cheers. I stared at her, stunned. My fork froze mid-air. I hadn't agreed to any of that. The only conversation we'd had about my apartment was 2 weeks ago when she tried to manipulate me into giving it to her, and I told her hell no. I stood up. My heart was pounding. I could feel 500 sets of eyes turning toward me, waiting for the proud sister to nod and play along. There must be a misunderstanding, I said, loud enough for the room to hear. Cassidy, I never agreed to that. Cassidy's smile froze. Bryce glanced at her, then at me. The crowd went quiet. Even the DJ paused whatever love song he was queuing up. Cassidy walked over like she was about to say something sweet. Instead, she slapped me. Full force. In front of 500 people. The sound echoed in the ballroom like someone had dropped a mic. My cheeks stung. My ears rang. And my mother gasped. A bridesmaid dropped her champagne flute. People stared like they weren't sure if this was part of the reception entertainment or a full-blown family breakdown. If you've ever had a family member throw you under the bus in public, hit that subscribe button. And drop a comment below. What would you have done if your sister smacked you in front of a room full of strangers? Cassidy leaned in and whispered, You ruined everything. I didn't say a word. I picked up my purse, walked out of the ballroom, and didn't look back. Outside, the air was cool. My hands were shaking. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just kept walking, past the valet stand, past the line of cars, straight to the street. I didn't even call an Uber. This wasn't just about the slap or the lie. It was about something way more profound than that. Something that had been building for years, buried under fake smiles and forced holidays. And now it was boiling over in front of a hotel full of people who probably thought our family was perfect. I didn't stop walking until I reached the end of the block and realized my hands were still shaking. The valet guy shouted something behind me, maybe asking if I needed a ride. I kept walking. I didn't want to sit, talk, explain, or deal with fake sympathy. I just needed air, clean, unfiltered air, without white roses and overpriced champagne and that smug look on Cassidy's face when she slapped me in front of everyone like I was some hired help who forgot her cue. On the walk back to my hotel room, yes, I had to book one because I wasn't staying with family. I finally felt the numbness wear off, replaced with something way worse. The familiar sting of knowing this wasn't some freak accident. This was just the next step in a long, ugly pattern. Cassidy had always been the favorite. Growing up, I wasn't bitter about it because I didn't have time to be. I was too busy cleaning up her messes, covering for her, keeping my head down. While she crashed my mom's car at 16, I was filling out ROTC forms. When she threw a party and trashed the living room, I was studying for my ASVAB. The rules just didn't apply to both of us equally. My parents, Darla and Ron, weren't monsters. They were just selective. My mom had a way of making excuses for Cassidy like it was a full-time job. "Cassidy's sensitive," she'd say, when I complained about her skipping chores, stealing my things, or screaming at me during dinner. "You're more mature. Let her grow at her pace." That pace involved dropping out of college twice and quitting jobs like they were gym memberships. When I enlisted, no one came to my send-off. My parents said they planned a weekend trip months in advance. Cassidy didn't even text. I left for basic training, feeling like a ghost in my family. 8 years later, I came back with a discharge and some discipline. I didn't expect a parade, but I didn't expect my parents to ask if I was done with that army stuff yet. I got licensed in real estate, joined Redwood Property Group, and ate canned soup for 2 years while saving every dollar I could. I didn't date. I didn't take vacations. I didn't buy new shoes unless the old ones had holes. The penthouse at Harrison Ridge Tower was the result of every sacrifice. 1,600 square feet, 2 bedrooms, a wraparound balcony, and a direct view of the Salt Lake skyline. It was quiet, clean, and mine. I signed those papers alone, with no family cheering me on, no champagne toast. Just my name on every dotted line and a locksmith who changed the locks the same day I moved in. The first time Cassidy came over, she walked in like she was shopping, ran her hand along the countertops, opened every cabinet. She sat on the couch like she had already lived there. "Wow," she said, fake smiling. "This is impressive, for someone who's always been so serious." I just nodded. I'd learned by then not to react. She started dropping hints soon after. "You're still single, right? What do you even do with all this space?" Or, "Bryce and I are just looking for somewhere peaceful to start out." Something like this. I ignored her. I shouldn't have, but I did. And then one night at a family dinner, not a holiday, just some random Sunday my parents insisted I show up for, Cassidy went full throttle. "Harper's place would be perfect for us," she said, loud and casual, as if I wasn't sitting there. "You don't even use the second bedroom, do you?" I said no, firmly, no explanation, no apology. My mother looked up from her salad like I'd slapped her. "Why not? It's temporary. She's your sister." "It's my home," I said. "I worked for it." Cassidy rolled her eyes. My dad stayed quiet like he always did. That night, I left early. I didn't wait for dessert. The next morning, Cassidy sent me and our parents a group text. Harper said no. Again. I guess being family only matters when she needs something. And just like that, I was the villain. Again. I didn't respond to the group text. I just tossed my phone face down on the counter and opened a bottle of wine at noon. That same afternoon, Cassidy showed up at my place unannounced. She let herself into the building, using the call box code I gave her once for an emergency. Apparently, this qualified. She waltzed into my apartment as she owned it. Didn't even knock, just opened the door and called out, "Harper!" I was still in leggings, hair up, wine glass in hand. She didn't care. "We need to talk," she said, plopping onto my couch like she was settling in for a casual chat, not barging into my home after staging a public guilt trip. I didn't sit down. We've already talked, I said. She brushed that off. Okay, but not like, seriously. Listen, Bryce and I don't want to live with mom and dad. That's toxic. And rent right now is insane. Not my problem, I said, keeping my voice level. You have space. You're barely even here. You're always at work or traveling for listings. It's just temporary, like 6 months, maybe a year tops. Then we'll move out once Bryce's bonus clears. That's not going to happen, I said flatly. Cassidy blinked like she couldn't believe I said no again. Why are you being like this? You've always had everything. You were the smart one, the strong one, the one who left and made it big. That wasn't admiration. It was resentment in a sparkly dress. You've had support every step of the way, I said. You just never used it, she scoffed. So now you're better than me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She stood up and looked around the living room again like she was mentally redecorating it. You don't even want kids. You're not getting married. You don't need this kind of space. Bryce and I are starting a family. That means something. I almost laughed. You think that entitles you to my home? I think family supports each other. I walked over and opened the door. We're done, she stormed out, muttering something about me being heartless. That was 3 days before the bridal shower, which of course was at our parents' house in Beaverton. I had RSVP'd yes weeks before when Cassidy pretended we were close. The event was exactly what you'd expect. Overdone centerpieces, catered hors d'oeuvres, mimosas before noon, and 100 women pretending to be thrilled for someone they barely knew. Cassidy floated through the room like royalty. My mom hovered like a stage manager. I stuck to the cheese tray and avoided eye contact. Halfway through the gift opening, Cassidy clinked her glass and cleared her throat. Before we dive into these lovely presents, Bryce and I have an announcement. The room hushed. She smiled straight at me. After the honeymoon, we'll be moving into Harper's gorgeous penthouse while we look for our forever home. She's been so generous. Polite applause followed. A few women even turned to me and nodded like I was some kind of saint. I stood up. There's been a misunderstanding, I said, keeping my tone as neutral as I could manage. I haven't offered my home to anyone. Silence, like someone had unplugged the stereo. Cassidy's smile froze. Don't be modest, sis. We talked, I said. I said no. That hasn't changed. My mother grabbed my elbow and dragged me into the kitchen like I had just cursed in church. Why would you embarrass her like that, she hissed. In front of all these people? I didn't, I said. She did that herself. You know how important appearances are. Couldn't you have just smiled and talked to her later? Because she made it public first. My mom shook her head like she didn't recognize me. You used to be so respectful. Maybe you just liked me better when I was quiet. I left early. Again, no one stopped me. I drove straight home without turning on the radio, sitting silently while the knot in my chest got tighter with every mile. When I returned to the penthouse, I didn't even take off my shoes. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the city lights through the windows, wondering how we got here. How a regular bridal shower turned into Cassidy publicly announcing her hostile takeover of my home, like a prize she won in a raffle. The next morning, I woke up to 6 missed calls from my mom, a long voicemail from my dad that said absolutely nothing, and one text from Cassidy read, "Unbelievable, you humiliated me." No punctuation, just those 4 words, like she was the one betrayed. I didn't answer. I didn't want another fight and wasn't interested in being gaslit into apologizing for something I didn't do. I called Nina instead. She picked up on the first ring. "Let me guess," she said, skipping hello. "The shower was a disaster." "You have no idea," I said. I paced the living room while telling her everything, from the fake announcement to my mom dragging me into the kitchen like a PR crisis manager. Nina let me vent without interrupting, like constantly. She was my closest friend. She lived in Minnesota now, but we talked every week. We met in college after I left the army, and she was one of the few people who saw through the surface level, put together older sister version of me. When I finally paused to breathe, she said, "You know this isn't about a place to live, right? She's not after square footage. She's after control. I know, I said. But what kind of person says something like that out loud? In front of people? The kind who's counting on you to roll over. You've always made things easy for her. That part stung because it was true. Cassidy had never been told no by anyone but me, and even then, it was usually under my breath or after the fact. I had spent most of my life keeping peace in a family that only respected silence. And it wasn't just silence, it was sacrifice. I had given up holidays, weekends, and sleep to avoid confrontation. Cassidy, meanwhile, got applause for showing up late to dinner and calling it fashionably behind. You don't owe her anything, Nina said. And you sure as hell don't owe your mom an explanation for setting a boundary. The word stuck with me. Boundary. Like I was putting up a fence around my life and daring anyone to cross it. That week, I stopped answering family group texts. I turned off read receipts. I even blocked Cassidy's number for 2 days to get some air. But quiet doesn't last long in a house like mine. Friday night, I got an email from my mom. It is not a text or voicemail, but an actual email. She said she was disappointed in my behavior and deeply hurt by my refusal to support Cassidy during a major life transition. She ended it with, "You've changed," and not in the proud, good for you way. I stared at it for a full minute, then closed my laptop. I wouldn't argue with someone who thought saying no was a personal attack. That weekend, I skipped Cassidy's bachelorette party planning brunch. I knew it was coming, but I made no excuses. No polite declines. I just didn't show. Monday, my dad called while I was at work. I let it go to voicemail. 37 seconds after he cleared his throat, he said, "Just calling to say, we still love you, okay?" Still. As if loving me had become optional. The only message I replied to that week was from Nina, who sent me a meme. Just because you're related doesn't mean they get to ruin your life. I laughed out loud. Then I poured myself a drink and sat by the window, watching the lights flicker across the skyline, wondering how many more lines I'd have to draw before someone in my family finally respected one. I left my phone charging in the other room and sat in the dark with my drink, listening to the quiet like it was the only honest thing left. The next morning, Cassidy texted me. "Coffee, just you and me." I stared at the message like it might explode. No sarcasm, no guilt tripping. Just that one line. It almost felt mature. I should have known better. I agreed anyway. Not because I thought we'd clear the air, but because I wanted to see what angle she was playing this time. We met at a bit of place in North Portland. Neutral ground, public, plenty of witnesses. She showed up overdressed for a Tuesday, with full makeup, a tight beige blazer, and 2 high heels for a casual coffee. A walking press release. "Thanks for coming," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Get to the point," I said. "No small talk." Cassidy smiled like I'd confirmed her script. "Bryce and I really need help right now." I said no, again. Still, no. She leaned in like this was a business deal, not her latest manipulation. "It's not forever, just until his new job kicks in. He's got something lined up with a fintech firm in Bend. But the onboarding takes time, and we're tight right now." I took a sip of my coffee. "So go rent a place. We can't pass the background check. Bryce had some credit issues." I stared at her. Translation: no one will rent to you, so now you're coming for me. "That's not fair," she said quickly. "You have space. You barely live in that penthouse. You travel, you work late, you're always out. You wouldn't even notice we're there." I notice when people cross boundaries. She bit her lip like she was about to cry. "Harper, please, you're my sister. And that used to mean something." That line pissed me off more than all the others. I put my coffee down. "You want to talk about what family means? It means not lying to 50 people at a bridal shower. It means not pressuring someone into giving up their home. It means not acting like you're owed things you didn't earn." Cassidy's voice dropped. "Bryce said you'd be like this." "Like what?" "Cold, rigid, controlling, military mindset, no empathy." I almost laughed. "Yeah, he would say that. because I'm the only one not falling for his scam. Her expression changed. It wasn't rage. It wasn't hurt. It was panic buried under fake calm. What scam? I leaned forward. You ever actually look into what Bryce does all day? What happened at his last job? Or do you just like the idea of being married to someone who says investment strategies out loud? Cassidy crossed her arms. This isn't about Bryce. Everything's about Bryce. You tied your whole future to someone you barely know, and now you're scrambling to fix it by taking what's not yours. She blinked fast. I thought you might understand. You've always been strong. You always figured things out. I need help. I sat back. And I did figure things out. On my own. Which is exactly why you don't get to take what I've built. That hit. She stared at her cup. So that's it? That's it. She didn't say goodbye. Just stood up and walked out. Heels clicking hard on the tile. Like she wanted everyone to know she was the victim. I stayed, finished my coffee, and watched a couple in the corner laugh over something on a phone screen. Normal people have a typical day. When I got home, a car was idling in front of my building. My parents. My mom waved as I stepped out of the rideshare. I didn't wave back. They cornered me in the lobby like they were staging an intervention. Cassidy's devastated, my mom said. She's embarrassed, I corrected. Not the same thing, my dad stepped in. Can't you just give her 6 months? Help her get on her feet? She's a grown woman. If she's not on her feet by now, she never will be. They didn't like that, but I didn't flinch. I walked past them, up to the elevator, and didn't turn around once. No guilt, no second guessing, just steel. I stood in the elevator, watching the floor numbers tick up, and realized I wasn't angry anymore. Just done. There's something cold that settles in once the arguing stops. Not peace, not forgiveness. Just clarity. Like a frost that preserves your boundaries because no one else will. That night, I changed the access code to my building's guest system. Then I called my HOA and flagged my unit for restricted access. No deliveries without approval. No packages were left unattended. No guests without ID. The concierge asked if I needed to file a report. I almost said no. Then I thought of Cassidy announcing my home like it was hers. I thought of Bryce's smug little smirk at that coffee shop. I said, yeah, make a note. The next few days were quiet, which in my family is rarely a good thing. On Thursday, I came home to find a courtesy card from building security. Someone had tried to enter the front desk, claiming they were there to prepare for move-in. The staff denied access. They'd left without causing a scene, but the message was clear. They were testing the locks. I called Nina. You were right. About what? They're not done. I told her what happened. She didn't even sound surprised. It's control, she said. They're poking the fence to see if it holds. I didn't sleep that night. I wondered. What if they just showed up one day with a truck and tried to force their way in? Could they fake a lease? Could they say I gave verbal permission? That thought made me pull out every email and text I'd exchanged with Cassidy about the condo. I archived them, saved them to a backup drive, and printed the worst ones. I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was building a record. Saturday morning, I got a call from someone I hadn't talked to in years, Deanna Rhodes. We'd been deployed together overseas. She was harsh and sharp and used to run logistics in Kandahar, like managing a Fortune 500 company. Still the same number, she said when I picked up. You sound the same too, I told her. Still like you're giving orders through a sandstorm, she laughed. Got your name from someone in town. Heard you're working real estate now. Luxury residential, Portland market. Good. You'll understand this then. I need a discreet buyer's agent. Someone who doesn't flinch at non-traditional clients. I raised an eyebrow. What's non-traditional? Let's say ex-military with interesting sources of income. We met for drinks that night. It felt good to talk to someone who didn't need explanations for my bluntness, who didn't flinch at the word boundaries. Deanna brought up Bryce casually. Guys' names come up before, she said. Something about gambling debt and a bad habit of borrowing funds from places he shouldn't. I leaned in. You serious? She nodded. I'm not saying he's committed fraud. I'm just saying there's a lot of smoke around that man. I drove home with adrenaline humming under my skin. If even a piece of what she said was genuine, Cassidy wasn't just marrying someone with bad credit. She was tying herself to a walking lawsuit. The next morning, I made a few calls, quiet ones. I had contacts from my early real estate days, title officers, private lenders, and a former colleague who now worked for a firm that did financial background screenings. I didn't ask anyone to dig deep. I said, if anything about Bryce Neely rings alarm bells, let me know. Within 48 hours, I had 2 callbacks. One said he'd been flagged for a defaulted loan he claimed was lost in processing. Another said he was on a private lender's internal do not approve list. That was enough for me. I didn't tell Cassidy. I didn't confront Bryce. I didn't need a fight. I needed leverage. And I was starting to get it. I printed everything, labeled a file. Please put it in a drawer in my home office. Then I sat back, took a deep breath, and realized I wasn't nervous. I wasn't scared of what they'd do. I was ready for whatever came next. I locked the file drawer, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and opened my laptop with one goal: make sure they couldn't touch anything I'd worked for. The first thing I did was call my building manager, Carla. She was no nonsense, a former NYPD, and didn't play games with entitled tenants or their dramatic families. Need something formal in writing? She asked after I explained what was happening. Yeah, I said. Something stating I haven't authorized anyone to access my unit, and I won't be subletting, leasing, or sharing it with anyone. Period. I'll get it notarized and logged with the HOA, she said. If they try again, we'll call the police. Simple. Director. Done. Next, I updated my insurance, added legal protections, reviewed my ownership documents. Bryce and Cassidy weren't getting within 100 feet of this place. Not physically, not financially. Then came the text from my mom. Reminder, bridal shower tomorrow, 2 p.m. at our house. Don't be late. I stared at it for a solid 30 seconds. No apology, no mention of the awkwardness, just a command. Business as usual. The next day, I showed up right on time with a gift I'd picked out. Tasteful, functional, not on the registry. Something I knew Cassidy wouldn't like. My mom opened the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You made it. Wouldn't miss it, I replied flatly. The living room was full of women, neighbors, friends, and Bryce's family. White decorations, mimosas, polite laughter. Cassidy sat at the center of it all, practically glowing, until the moment she stood up, clinked her glass, and said with theatrical cheer, Before I open these wonderful gifts, I have a special announcement. She looked at me while saying it. That should have been my warning. Bryce and I are so thrilled to be starting our new life together, and we're even more thrilled to share that we'll be moving into Harper's beautiful penthouse. She so generously offered us her space, while we find our forever home. The room erupted in claps and congratulations. I could feel 50 pairs of eyes turn to me, smiling, nodding, expecting me to stand up and confirm this gracious gesture. Instead, I set down my drink, stood slowly, and said, Actually, that's not true. I haven't offered my home to anyone. The silence dropped like a bomb. Cassidy's smile froze in place. Harper, she said through clenched teeth, don't be modest. We talked about it, I said evenly, and I said no, repeatedly. More silence, a few gasps. Bryce's mother looked like she'd just bitten into a lemon. Someone at the back whispered, Oh, wow, Cassidy recovered fast. Anyway, she chirped, let's get to the presents. But the mood had already shifted. People mumbled awkwardly. Some excused themselves to the bathroom. Even my aunt, who'd always defended Cassidy no matter what, kept her eyes on the gift bag in her lap and said nothing. Later, while grabbing my purse, my mom cornered me in the kitchen. What the hell was that? The truth, I said. You embarrassed her. She embarrassed herself. Her voice dropped. Do you know how bad that made us look? In front of Bryce's family, I looked at her flatly. You care more about appearances than what's actually happening. She exhaled sharply. You've always had everything. Can't you give something back? That exact line had followed me since childhood. You're lucky. You're strong. You owe the rest of us. No, I said. I don't owe Cassidy a damn thing. I left without saying goodbye. By the time I got home, the mimosas had worn off, but the adrenaline hadn't. I removed the file again and added a note. Public false claim, March 12th. Bridal shower. It was no longer just about my home. This was a pattern, entitlement, manipulation, escalation. And it wasn't done yet. I tossed the note into the file, locked it shut again, and for the first time, I realized I needed to start protecting myself from my own family like I would from any hostile client. The next day was a quiet Sunday. I slept in, skipped breakfast, and took a long walk to clear my head. I almost convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, the worst of it had passed. But I was wrong. That afternoon, my building's front desk called me. Hi, Miss Lane. Sorry to bother you. There's a couple here saying they're your family and that they have permission to access your unit. I stopped mid-step. Excuse me? Who? A man and a woman said their names were Bryce and Cassidy. They brought luggage and a few boxes. They're insisting you said they could move in. I felt a wave of cold anger settle into my chest. Do not let them in. I've never authorized that, and I want this incident documented. We've already started a report. They're refusing to leave and demanding we call security. Good, call them, and let Cassidy and Bryce know they're trespassing. They were gone when I arrived 20 minutes later, but not quietly. Security had turned them away. And according to Carla, Cassidy caused a scene. She shouted about how I was ruining her life and going back on my word. Bryce stood there like a statue with his arms crossed, as if his presence alone would convince someone to hand him the keys. I watched the security footage. Cassidy pointed, yelling. Bryce was carrying a suitcase as if he were moving into a hotel. It would be laughable if it weren't so pathetic. That night, I emailed my lawyer. We hadn't worked together in years, but she remembered me. Hi, Natalie. This is Harper Lane. I need help with a family situation involving harassment and attempted unauthorized entry to my home. She replied within the hour. Let's talk tomorrow. Keep everything, messages, photos, video, anything you have. I spent the evening collecting screenshots, printing emails, and organizing texts. I even added my mom's guilt trip messages. Not because they were criminals, but because they painted a clear picture of pressure, manipulation, and denial. The next morning, Natalie called me. Her voice was calm, sharp, and efficient. Just what I needed. You're not being dramatic, she said, after reviewing the footage and texts. This isn't just a misunderstanding. It's a pattern of behavior. You have every right to file for a protective order. Part of me hesitated. Protective orders were for people in real danger, right? For stalkers and abusive exes. Not for brides and brothers-in-law with entitlement complexes. But Natalie shut that down fast. Protective orders aren't just for bruises. They're for boundaries. Cassidy and Bryce tried to enter your home under false pretenses. That's trespassing. She slapped you in public. That's assault. The pattern matters. She drafted the paperwork that afternoon. While at it, I updated the building's access log, formally banned them from the property, and filed a cease and desist letter to make it official. That night, I got a text from my mom. Just one sentence. Do you have any idea what you're doing to this family? I didn't answer. I saved it with the others. 2 hours later, Bryce emailed me directly. The subject line said, "Let's be adults." I opened it. Inside was a wall of text alternating between threats and passive-aggressive nonsense. He warned me about how dragging this into court would damage reputations, and that Cassidy is willing to forgive you if you stop this madness now. Then came the line that made me stop cold. If you don't reconsider, we may have to bring up certain personal details to your clients and coworkers. There it was, a threat, black and white. I forwarded it to Natalie. She replied, "This just got easier." I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the skyline. Everything I'd worked for, my peace, my home, my reputation, they were willing to destroy it all for a free place to live. And I wasn't about to let them. I closed the laptop, walked to the window, and stood there gripping the glass. My reflection looked calm, but I'd never been so ready to fight. The courthouse smelled like coffee and disinfectant. It was barely 8 a.m., but Natalie and I were already waiting outside Judge McClure's courtroom. She wore a charcoal suit and heels, sharp enough to draw blood, flipping through her file like she was reviewing someone else's funeral program. I wasn't nervous. I was focused and tired. The kind of tiredness that lives in your bones, not from lack of sleep, but from knowing people you loved once are now trying to get you in broad daylight. Cassidy and Bryce showed up 20 minutes later, dressed like it was picture day. Cassidy wore a pale pink dress with perfect curls, trying to look innocent. Bryce went full courtroom finance bro. Navy blazer, expensive watch, smug grin. Their lawyer was exactly who I expected. Mid-40s, square jaw, polished and paid well enough to keep a straight face while representing garbage. Inside the courtroom, it didn't take long for the pretense to unravel. Natalie started strong, laying out the facts with zero emotion. Slap. Attempted forced entry. Threatening email, timeline, evidence, documentation. She submitted the video footage from my building, screenshots of texts and emails, and Judge Lawrence Rowe's statement. Yes, that Judge Rowe, the one who'd witnessed Cassidy's slap firsthand at the wedding. Bryce's lawyer objected and tried to spin it as family drama, and a misunderstanding escalated by stress. The usual sanitized garbage. But the judge wasn't buying it. When asked if Cassidy slapped me at her wedding, she hesitated, looked at Bryce, and finally muttered, "Yes, but it wasn't malicious, it was emotional. She embarrassed me." "And did you attempt to enter Ms. Lane's residence without her knowledge or consent?" the judge asked. Cassidy stayed silent. Bryce spoke up. "We thought she changed her mind. She never said no clearly." Natalie pounced. "We have 3 written rejections, 2 voicemails, a recorded phone call. What exactly is unclear. They backpedaled and tried to play the victim, said I was spiteful and just trying to make them look bad." The judge held up Bryce's email and read it aloud, the part where he threatened to expose me to clients if I didn't give them the apartment. "This, Mr. Lorman, reads less like a misunderstanding and more like extortion." Silence. Bryce looked down. Cassidy's eyes filled with tears on cue. Then came the moment I didn't expect. Judge McClure looked straight at me and asked, "Do you feel unsafe around these 2? I didn't hesitate. Yes, not because they'll hurt me, but because they think they're entitled to my life, and they're not going to stop until someone tells them no in a language they can't twist." He nodded. "This court finds sufficient cause to grant the protective order," he said plainly. Cassidy gasped. Bryce leaned back in his chair like someone had pulled the rug out from under him. Effective immediately, the judge continued. Cassidy Blackwell and Bryce Lorman are ordered to remain no less than 300 feet from Ms. Lane's residence, workplace, and person. No direct contact. All communication must go through counsel. Violations will be met with criminal charges. Natalie smiled like she'd just closed a $1 million deal. As we packed our things, I saw my parents sitting at the back of the courtroom. I hadn't even noticed them before. My dad looked stunned. My mom looked like someone had slapped her with reality for the first time. They didn't come down to talk. They just watched. Outside, the sun hit me like a spotlight. I breathed in deep. For the first time in weeks, my lungs didn't feel like they were on fire. Natalie turned to me. "You did the hard part. Now you just keep standing your ground." I nodded. Not because I felt victorious, but because I finally felt like I wasn't playing defense anymore. And I wasn't going to hand over a single inch again. I didn't wait for anyone to follow. I walked straight down the courthouse steps and let the weight fall off my shoulders one concrete slab at a time. When I reached the sidewalk, Ethan was already leaning against his car with coffee in hand. I hadn't asked him to come. He just knew. "You good?" he asked, handing me the cup. "I am now," I said, and I meant it. We sat on a nearby bench, sipping coffee silently, while the city moved around us like nothing had happened. It was surreal how normal everything looked. People are going to lunch, traffic lights are changing. And I just walked out of a courtroom where my sister got legally told to stay the hell away from me. It took 2 hours before the first text came in. "Mom, you really blindsided Cassidy today. She's devastated." I didn't respond. Then came Aunt Louise. "Your mother is heartbroken. You could have handled this privately. Uncle Derek. Family doesn't take family to court." The messaging was coordinated like a political campaign. Cassidy was rebranding herself as the wounded party. The headlines in the family group chat were crystal clear. Mackenzie overreacted. Cassidy is fragile. Poor Bryce is caught in the middle. Mackenzie needs therapy. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I forwarded everything to Natalie. She replied within minutes. "Don't engage. Let them spiral. Legally, you're protected. Emotionally, don't get pulled back in." Easier said than done. The next morning, my mom showed up unannounced at my office. Reception texted me a heads up. "There's an older woman here, says she's your mother, wants to speak with you urgently." I stepped out of a meeting with a client and met her in the hallway. She looked like she hadn't slept. "You embarrassed your sister in front of the entire family," she said without preamble. "She slapped me in front of 200 people," I replied, "and tried to steal my apartment. Are we pretending that didn't happen?" She was under pressure. Weddings are emotional. Weddings aren't an excuse for assault. She lowered her voice. "You didn't have to take it to court. Now you've ruined your relationship forever." I almost laughed. I didn't ruin anything. Cassidy did that herself. "She's your sister. And I'm your daughter. But that's never stopped you from picking her every time." That landed. For a moment, she just stood there. Then quietly, "We didn't know about the threats. Or Bryce's email. Or Judge Rowe's statement." "Exactly," I said. "You didn't know because you didn't ask." She didn't argue, just looked tired. Worn out from trying to spin reality into something more comfortable. I'd been doing that too for years until I stopped. She left without saying goodbye. 3 days later, I got an email from Bryce. Subject: "Let's be adults about this." He offered to bury the hatchet if I'd lift the restraining order and publicly clarify that there'd been a misunderstanding. Said it was for Cassidy's sake and to help her move forward. I forwarded it to Natalie. She called me 5 minutes later. "Mackenzie, you need to see this." Attached was a file she'd pulled from a private legal resource. Bryce was under quiet investigation from the State Securities Division. Allegations of client fund misuse, offshore accounts, and unpaid tax liabilities. Nothing charged yet, but serious smoke. "I think we know why he wanted your place so badly," she said. "He was never planning to rent anything. He needed something in someone else's name, fast." Everything snapped into focus. The pressure, the entitlement, the obsession with my penthouse. He wasn't just a leech. He was drowning, and Cassidy had tied herself to him like a second anchor. The day after that, a reporter from the Seattle Ledger emailed me. "Ms. Lane, we're working on a story involving Mr. Lorman and would appreciate a statement." I declined to comment, but I knew the story was coming. By the end of the week, Bryce's financial scandal broke wide open. Fraud, client deception, a long history of gambling. Cassidy is listed as the emergency contact on multiple shady LLC filings. It was all public now. The narrative shifted overnight. Suddenly, I wasn't the cold sister anymore. I was the one who saw the fire before it hit the house. When I left my 3rd therapy session, my thoughts were finally starting to line up. I wasn't magically healed, but I was clearer. And that's probably why, when I walked into my condo lobby and saw my mother sitting there like she was waiting for a hair appointment, I didn't freeze. She stood up fast. "We need to talk." "I'm not doing this here," I said flatly, motioning to the concierge that everything was okay. He gave me a look like, "Really?" and nodded. Mom followed me out to the sidewalk, where I stopped. "Are you seriously still pretending you're the victim?" I asked, not even trying to filter myself. She clutched her purse like I'd insulted her cooking. "You blindsided your sister in front of everyone." "No," I said. She lied. In public. About moving into my home, and then hit me when I corrected her. That's not being blindsided. That's being called out. "She was humiliated," my mother whispered. I let out a short, dry laugh. "She humiliated herself. Don't put that on me." Mom's tone shifted from pleading to cold. "I didn't raise you to be heartless." "No," I said. "You raised me to tolerate chaos and pretend it was normal." She blinked like I'd slapped her. "We're family," I shook my head. If family means enabling a grown woman who slaps people, lies about housing, and then tries to enter a home she doesn't own, then maybe I'm not interested in that definition. She turned away without another word. No goodbye, no apology. Just walked off, leaving the guilt behind like some old handbag I refused to carry anymore. The next day, building management called again. This time, Haley and Matt had come by again with a moving truck. They told the security guard they were finally here to move in. I nearly dropped my phone. The footage was worse. Matt had shouted at the front desk staff. Haley had tried to sweet-talk the concierge like this was all just a mix-up. I sent the video straight to my lawyer. Enough was enough. When the restraining order was officially filed 2 days later, I didn't even feel anxious. I felt calm, as if I had finally taken back control. That calm didn't last long. Matt sent me a voice message that made my skin crawl. "Look, this is just getting messy. No one wants lawyers involved. We're family now. Let's settle this like adults. But if you push this, I can't guarantee what'll come out." That last part, not a threat. A promise. I forwarded it to my lawyer and went to work like any other Tuesday. Except it wasn't. Later that afternoon, one of my top clients canceled a meeting without explanation. I called her straight to voicemail. Her assistant texted. "She's concerned about recent comments she's heard. She'll be in touch." My stomach sank. That night, I opened my inbox to find an anonymous email from a burner address. "Hope your clients know about your little anger issues. Military doesn't always make someone stable. They weren't just pushing boundaries now, they were kicking down doors." I drove straight to my lawyer's office at 8 a.m. "They're trying to wreck my job now," I told her, showing the messages and client thread. She didn't flinch. "We escalate this. Now that's intimidation and defamation. They're opening doors they won't be able to close." We prepped new documentation and contacted law enforcement to add harassment and defamation to the existing restraining order filing. It should have ended there, but nothing about this family mess ever went easy. 3 days later, I walked into work and saw 2 people I didn't recognize waiting in the lobby. Suits, clipboards, generic smiles, corporate compliance. I knew before they opened their mouths. Somebody filed an anonymous complaint with my firm, said I was unstable, a threat to clients, and prone to violence. My boss called me into his office that afternoon. He looked uncomfortable, as if he hated everything about this. "We've worked together for years. I know this isn't who you are," he said. "But we have to look into it." I nodded. "I understand. Do what you need to do." He paused. "I'm sorry, Harper. Really." I realized something as I sat back at my desk, staring at a blank screen. Matt and Haley weren't just trying to steal my home. They were trying to ruin my life. And if I didn't push back harder, they might win. I closed my laptop, walked straight to the window, and stared at the city like it might give me answers no one else would. Outside, the sun was fading behind the skyline. The light hit the glass towers just right, making them look more stable than anything felt lately. My phone buzzed again on the counter. Voicemail. Probably my mother or another relative trying to reason with me. I didn't check. I wasn't interested in hearing another round of guilt-wrapped manipulation. Instead, I changed into gym clothes, laced up my sneakers, and hit the treadmill. My legs moved fast, but my mind moved faster. I was trying to outrun the question that kept creeping in. How had we ended up here? A family so tangled in appearances, resentment, and unspoken expectations that it took a courthouse and legal paperwork to draw a basic line in the sand. After 30 minutes, soaked in sweat and clarity, I stepped off and texted Delaney. You were right. It wasn't just Haley. It was all of them. Her reply came quick. And now you get to decide what you allow from here on out. That's stuck what I allow. Not what I tolerate, not what I survive, but what I permit to exist in my space, my life. That night, I started making a list, not of goals, but of boundaries. No matter the history or shared DNA, I wouldn't allow these anymore. Number 1, no more pretending things were normal. 2 days later, an envelope showed up at my office. No name on the outside, just my address handwritten in familiar looping letters. Inside was a 5-page letter from Haley. She didn't apologize, not really. Instead, she explained how she'd felt left behind, thought she deserved a fresh start in a place like mine, and how sharing it seemed like the fair thing to do since I had more than I needed. I read it twice. Then I folded it up, slid it back into the envelope, and filed it, not in the trash, but in a drawer marked proof. Because that's what it was. Proof of how deep the entitlement went. Proof that she still didn't get it even after all the fallout. This wasn't about space, it was about respect. And she never had any for mine. Later that week, Delaney came by with Chinese takeout and 2 bottles of wine. So, she said, between bites of lo mein, any movement from the Ryan front? Only sideways, I said. Apparently he's taken up a consulting role with some sketchy crypto startup. Guess the finance band didn't cover Web3. Delaney laughed, then shook her head. It's wild. He really thought he was going to manipulate you into handing over $1 million condo like it was a spare key. Because it worked on everyone else, I said. It worked on my parents, on Haley, probably half his old clients. They all just handed over whatever he asked for, attention, money, blind trust. She sipped her wine. Not you, though. No, I said, not anymore. That weekend, I attended a local real estate conference in Denver. It wasn't just work, it was escape. A way to recalibrate around people who spoke in market trends and renovation budgets, instead of guilt and obligation. During a networking mixer, I ran into someone I hadn't seen since the military, Jesse Hart, former logistics officer. Now a regional VP for a national brokerage. We grabbed coffee the next morning, and when I told her what was happening, she just blinked at me. Your sister slapped you at her wedding and tried to move into your condo. Correct. Jesse let out a low whistle. You always did attract chaos, but at least now you're making it sign a waiver. It was a stupid joke, but I laughed harder than in weeks. Hearing it from someone who knew me before all this felt good. Someone who remembered Harper Lane from Fort Campbell, not just Harper the broker, the scapegoat, or the sister. As we parted ways, she said, if you ever want to transfer out here, let me know. We could use someone who doesn't take crap. I told her I'd think about it. As I boarded my flight home, I wondered whether my family would change, but whether I needed them to anymore. As the plane touched down and the cabin lights flickered on, I pulled my phone off airplane mode and braced myself for whatever mess I had on the other side. There were 6 missed calls from my parents, 2 voicemails from Haley's number, and 1 from a blocked number. I didn't listen to any of them. I wasn't interested in another round of gaslighting or guilt trips. I already knew this. The court's decision had come down while I was out of town. By the time I made it back to my penthouse, the lobby staff was buzzing. Javier, the head concierge, pulled me aside the second I walked in. Ms. Taylor, I just want you to know we followed the restraining order to the letter, he said. They showed up again. My stomach dropped. Who? Your sister and her husband. Friday morning. Same thing. They claimed they were just dropping off boxes. We didn't let them up. I gave him a tired nod. Thanks, Javier. You did the right thing. He handed me a printed incident report and a USB with security footage. I took it without looking at it. At this point, it was just more evidence, more proof, more desperation from people who didn't know how to take no for an answer. Inside my unit, everything was untouched, quiet, safe. I sat on the edge of the couch and finally listened to my mom's voicemail. "Lainey, honey, can we please just talk before you go and do something you can't take back? Your sister's been under a lot of stress. She didn't mean for any of this to get so big. You've always been the strong one. Please don't ruin the family over one misunderstanding." I deleted it. It didn't hurt, not because it sounded exactly like every other time my mother excused Haley's behavior by labeling it a misunderstanding. I was done pretending this was normal. I was done carrying the burden of everyone's comfort but mine. An hour later, my attorney, Callie Harper, called with an update. The judge extended the protective order for 1 year, she said. Full enforcement. They are legally barred from contacting you, approaching your home, or attempting to move in. Any violation from here out will lead to criminal charges. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Good. What about the trespassing report? It's with the DA's office now. They're reviewing charges against Ryan and possibly Haley. The footage helps, so does the building report. What about his financial investigation? It's officially out of our hands, but you should know, Ryan's facing an SEC inquiry. There's talk of misappropriated client funds. It's getting serious. That should have made me feel vindicated. Instead, it just made me sad. Sad that my sister had latched onto a man who was as entitled and dishonest as she was. Sad that my parents couldn't or wouldn't see it. It was sad that I had spent so many years swallowing my frustration and bending backwards to keep peace in a family with no interest in genuine peace. Only control. That night, I got another email. This one wasn't from Haley. It was from Ryan. It was short. 2 sentences. If you keep pushing this, you're going to regret it. People talk, Lainey. That was it. No subject line, no explanation, no signature. I forwarded it to Callie without hesitation. She called me the next morning, fuming. He's trying to intimidate you. That's borderline extortion, especially given the ongoing investigation. I shrugged. Let him talk. I'm not the one hiding anything. You want to press charges? I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew that every time I drew a line, my family would frame it as cruelty. But then I remembered the slap, the looks from the guests, my mother's disappointed face, the sick feeling in my gut as I left that ballroom. Yes, I said, file it. By the end of that week, I had to give a formal statement to the prosecutor's office. Ryan's email, his history, the court ruling, the attempted break-ins. It all painted the picture for them. And that picture was ugly. The investigation moved fast. Ryan was placed on unpaid leave from his firm and then formally terminated. Haley, now in damage control mode, ghosted me entirely. A mutual friend told me they were reconsidering their living situation and that Ryan might move in with his parents. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had tried to kick me out of my home, and now he was back in his childhood bedroom. What I didn't expect, though, was the call I got from my dad. Not my mom, not Haley, my dad. Lainey, I know you don't want to hear from me, he started. His voice oddly small, but I think we made a mistake. I didn't say anything. I'm not asking you to forgive anyone. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For a second, I thought it was a trick. Some setup to make me backtrack. But there was no push in his tone, no expectation. Just a quiet, tired man who'd watched his family unravel and finally realized why. I hung up without a word, and for once, I felt like I was finally controlling my story. I set the phone down, walked into the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. Not because I was thirsty, but because I needed something solid to hold, while the past finally loosened its grip. The silence in my apartment wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean. Empty in the way a fresh slate should feel. I leaned against the counter and watched the last bits of daylight settle over the city through my window. No drama, no texts, no banging on the door. Haley and Mason had both gone radio silent after the hearing. The protective order had been extended without contest, and I heard through my attorney that Mason was working on a plea deal for securities fraud. The feds were auditing some of the investments he'd pulled Haley into. They'd frozen a few of their accounts. Suddenly, all that confidence he threw around evaporated once he had to explain his finances in a courtroom packed with records. As for Haley, she'd left the city, back to our parents' house in El Paso. Mom still called every couple of weeks and tried to smooth over the wreckage as if it was just a little sibling spat. But the tone was different now, softer, like she wasn't sure what to believe anymore. And for once, she didn't push when I held my ground. She just listened. The family dynamic was changing, whether anyone liked it or not. Boundaries have that effect. They force people to pick between growth or distance, sometimes both. I was in the middle of unpacking new kitchen stools when I got the email. Short, from Haley, not dramatic. Not some grand apology, just, "I'm in therapy. I'm trying to understand what happened between us. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I wanted to say that." I stared at it for a long time before replying. I didn't feel the rush of anger or triumph I expected. Just space. Like a cracked window, open air could move through again someday. My reply was as brief. "Thank you for letting me know. I hope it helps." She didn't answer, and I didn't expect her to. A month later, I invited Kara and Alana over for dinner. We laughed so hard over wine and takeout that I forgot for a moment that life had been anything else. No one asked about my sister. No one tiptoed around anything. It was just 3 women, good food, and peace. That night, as I stood on my balcony with a glass of wine and my bare feet on the cold tile, I finally let myself feel it. Not closure, not yet, but freedom. I had made it through. Not without scars, but not broken either. And more importantly, not bitter. Mason never got near my home. My sister never moved in. I kept my space, sanity, and whatever family dignity I still had left. And I did it without throwing a punch, raising my voice, or giving in to guilt. Some people think revenge looks like public shaming or screaming matches. But real revenge, the kind that sticks, is living your life untouched by those who tried to ruin it. When I walked through my front door at the end of the day, I didn't brace for impact. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and breathed like I earned every square foot because I did. And maybe that's what this whole thing was about. Not just the penthouse, not just Haley, but every moment in my life I was told to be the bigger person, to shrink myself, to tolerate bad behavior in the name of family. It all led to this one choice, finally saying no and mean it. It changed everything. Now I don't owe anyone an explanation for having boundaries. I don't justify saying no, and I don't confuse family loyalty with self-sacrifice. I learned that the hard way and paid for it in full, but it was worth it. And if any of this sounds familiar to you, if you've been there and are still there, I hope you take this as your permission slip. You're not wrong for protecting your peace. You're not selfish for saying enough. You're not cruel for drawing a line. You're just done. And that's okay. And the thing is, being done doesn't mean you don't care anymore. It means you care enough about yourself to stop bleeding for people who never learned how to treat you right. I didn't burn the bridge. I just finally stopped rebuilding it alone. And once I stepped off it for good, I saw how steady the ground could be when it wasn't built on guilt, silence, or fear. So now I live quietly, honestly, without needing a family audience to validate my choices. I open my front door, sit with my peace, and sleep like someone who no longer carries someone else's chaos. And trust me, there's no sweeter revenge than living exactly how they said you couldn't. If you've ever dealt with messy family drama or had to fight for your peace, you're not alone. I share powerful family revenge stories like this one, because sometimes the people closest to us cause the deepest wounds. Subscribe for more family stories that don't sugarcoat the truth. And stick around if you believe standing up for yourself isn't just brave, it's necessary.